Hello, children, adults, seniors. It's a new day, and Star Wars paraphernalia is still running rampant in every store across the globe, so we're clearly drawing closer to the end of days.
Yep.
So, how's everyone?
Pretty good.
Pretty. Yeah. Yep. I'm embracing the end of days. Really.
I'm glad. I like starting off with like a nice positive like atmosphere, so good. So joining me today, as always, is this lovely panel. We have the score writer and oil tycoon Kelsey Moser. We have LOL esports and splice writer, as well as lifestyle guru Emily Rand.
Hi.
And then we have Dignitas head analyst Raz. I'm not really sure how long that title is going to last after it got knocked out of the
Oh
first
my
round of
God.
I Am Clone, but I'm praying for you, friend. So there's that. And then there's me. I'm Andy, host and professional lingerie model, and this is episode 63 of China Talk.
Yay.
Woo.
Yay. Okay. So this is gonna be a somewhat shorter episode since mostly I just want to talk about QG's performance at IM and what everyone here took away from it. And we're gonna see if we could possibly try to use their performance as a precursor for the upcoming LPL split, which starts January, what was it, 14?
Mhm.
14.
I think so.
14. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm just gonna refer to this episode as National Lampoon QG Go to I Am Clone because I'm whimsical like that. So I kind of want to just jump in with Raz talking about his team's discussion against QG in the quarterfinals, since he kind of got a first-hand perspective. So what exactly did they do that you absolutely expected, and what did they not what did they kind of do that threw you off guard? And I don't know what you think contributed to your team's loss against them, but let's just say for all intents and purposes that they just did something to surprise you guys. Go on.
So going into Qiao, we knew of their style really well. Essentially, that I think the biggest one, of course, the biggest uh, red red flag is it? I guess red flag is the proper term. Is Swift. Swift and Doinby essentially. I think Swift is a jungler that you can pretty much easily telegraph is that he's just going to play Nidalee.
Mm-hmm.
Nidalee, maybe at least Lee Sin, I don't know, but like I feel like Nidalee is just a champion that he just like clings on to, and if he gets the opportunity to play it, or if he sees that it's something he's looking towards, then he'll pick it. And Doinby is usually put on, and I guess it's his choice, but like he likes the wave clear mid lane champions. And the caveat is, God, I'm just is the thing about him playing wave clear champions is that he also knows the counters to him as well. And of course, everybody knows the counters, but he's extremely willing to play the counters into it, and that extends to like LeBlanc or Cassidon, etc. So with those two, and of course with just getting past the point of the champions, the Doinby and Swift play really closely to each other in a sense. They just play off of each other's pressure. And so while bot lane, TNT and TCT just kind of are left to their own devices, I feel like majority of the early game, not even just the early game, but just Xiao just plays like it's Doinby and um, Swift playing off of each other. And it used to be it used to be the bot lane as well. When they used to play like just basically wave clear champions like Sivir, so they can really just rotate off of their weight, like off their pushes, or they can facilitate like Swift's invades, or if he wants to pressure something in general. But yeah, so that was the main pressure point, and the big one of course is that V is put to his own devices in a sense. So I don't want to call him. I feel like a poor term is like calling him Dyrus, but because he's not at all. but just he's left to his own, and if he gets it ganked, that's well and all that works for him, and he can use it. But the game, early game, mid game, they don't play towards him. So yeah, that was the knowledge going into it, or at least just the very like the gist of it.
Okay, so again, so what about them do you think led to your own team losing?
Oh god, I don't even think it was about that. I think it was mostly just about us. I think that
Okay,
um,
because I mean, not to interrupt you, but a question that I left that I left with after watching the tournament was sort of about uh you know how much of QG making the finals of IM Cologne was them and how much of it was the under preparation of their opponents because you guys are a relatively new team. You guys played with the sub, and then I don't know how long the Fnatic roster's been playing together, but they're also
yeah,
new. So all the games went to 3 games, and then the finals went to 5 games. So it really made me question how, like, again, a topic we're going to touch on earlier is how much in if they actually improved. So you think that it was more on your part that you guys lost than anything that they pulled out that surprised you.
yeah. I think the most effective strategy that like to deal with Jagu comes to well, first of all, their laning is weak. Like
Hmm.
you can get a I don't want to say you can get away with a lot, but they can't get away with a lot. You could punish them in the early game, and that's what essentially we did in the early game. We kind of just um, took over the game just from the laning phase in our gank pressure. And you and the biggest strategy that they kind of fail against is just split pushing, either be it with Twisted Fate or just if you pretty much play around the top lane, like be like no one, not even just V, but no one can play to getting camped alone. That's not how like it's near impossible. So um, I think that we failed because just like maybe I don't know. I don't know if Chagu is underperforming against us, but I felt like they were playing how I expected them, and they faltered essentially. Well, we
Okay.
faltered, but
Well, okay.
once we
So
got to
what do you?
Baron,
Okay, so
yeah.
trying to stick to like a positive. What is it about them that you? Okay, so let. Okay, so we can say that you nothing that they did really surprise you. But what is it? What is it? What's something that they're, I guess, really good at that you already knew, but and you tried to prepare for, but once you already in game, like your players like just didn't know the extent of that strength until they played against it.
Mm, perhaps the extent of team fighting. Perhaps I feel or at least the willingness they have in terms of team fighting, because there were situations where it felt like um, we had a clear Baron, or we had a clear like there was no way they could go. Well, at least that's the thought process. I remember when I was watching the games, it was like, yeah, this is a free Baron. Like, there's no way they would try and contest this, or if they did, we should be able to turn and we should be able to take the fight. And then we went for the fight, and it felt like it was advantageous. Except, like, no, it was. That's not it. That's not how it turned out at all. We lost, and there was even a moment where TNT would like flash an Oriana ult, which is on Twitch, and he was able to get off a lot of autos while ulting uh, as Twitch. So that's like AOE ulti while Baron damage is going through, and that's gonna tear you down. So there's a lot of cases where it's like you can watch those games over and over and be like, wow, we just executed team fights poorly,
Hmm.
but they were able to execute team fights actually rather well. That's what it was. That's what it came down to, and they were just willing to take as many team skirmish and take those team fights when the opportunity arose.
Okay, that's
Mm.
fair. I mean, those same tenacious qualities that we already knew from watching them for an
Yep.
entire, from LSPL and then LPL. It's kind of just like we know this, and then like seeing it in print, it's just like, well, I don't know why I'm surprised seeing that.
I wasn't even. I was
Um,
just like I wasn't surprised. I knew it was gonna happen, and I was like, well, we should just split. But I don't know. It just sometimes plans don't work together.
so from last week's episode, I know uh, both Emily and Kelsey said like they'd be surprised if QG made it past semifinals. I know I think I don't remember exactly, but I think you said like you thought that they were actually like the probably had the best chances of
Yeah.
winning. the entire thing? Okay, so was anyone actually surprised that they made it to the finals and like to 5 games of at that?
I was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
Was was there any particular game that they've played that you were actually like, okay, this is like them at their absolute best? Anything?
I think the first game of the final, kind of. I mean, I wouldn't say their absolute best, but they played more cohesively in the early game than I've seen them play for a really long time. So I would say first game of the final.
Okay, that's fair. I was just curious, you know. I personally I was excited that they probably of all the Chinese teams that played recently, of like the top Chinese teams, they've probably done the best since, you know, everyone else kind of shit the bed at Worlds.
Oh my
For
And-
all teams to do it, Qiao.
Yeah.
LGD shit the bed at Worlds, and then, you know, had a chance of redemption, and then shit the bed at IEM San Jose. So I mean, if anything, QG, as ridiculous as they are sort of like our shining light.
Yeah.
Okay. So I kind of want
This
to,
is actually QG Reapers talk.
yeah. So this is the joint
We are
power
disowning
hour.
all
We're
the other
disowning the
Chinese
rest of China.
Yeah, this is the only team with this team endorses anymore. You know.
No, we'll talk more about my feelings on that later, I assume. So
Okay, so I kind of want to just spend the rest of the show talking about the players specifically, and then before topping it off with, you know, what impressions we sort of left of the tournament with. Okay, so let's start with Swift, Emily.
Hi, Andy.
Hi. So a little bird told me that you love jungle pathing, and you actually, if I recall correctly, just released an article on Swift.
Oh.
I did. Whoa. And I also, like, more, I guess, of my interest, I charted a bunch of his early pathing from this tournament.
I
So
like Swift's groupie. Like,
not even actually. Like, it's kind of funny because I think looking at his early pathing now, like specifically for this tournament, you really see the best and the worst of Swift.
Mm.
And it's kind of something we've talked about with when speaking of Qiao, how he'll sometimes have those games where he just like does nothing and farms.
Oh god.
And Swift has a tendency to do that. So it's interesting that he's earned such a reputation for being like a really super aggressive jungler, because he's only aggressive early, like about half the
Yeah.
time. And then the other times he has these games where he's just power farming and he ignores all of his lanes. And Qiao already isn't a laning team,
Yeah.
so it's just, you know, not fun to watch in the early game. And he even had a couple of those games, like, I was super impressed with the way Kira took advantage of that in your first game against Qiao Raz. I thought that was great. And so I think if you study what Swift does, you see all of his strengths and all of his like many problems. And one of the huge problems you won't see actually from his pathing is the fact that he just makes, where his aggression comes from is usually like mid game, like early game, like going into mid game, and he'll just make these really awful decisions to go in, like, or like try to 1v1 someone randomly when he really shouldn't be. That happened a couple times in some of these games. And I think, I guess, going back and looking at when he was in Korea and then looking at LSPL, in Korea he was known for that. The reason why he was picked up by CJ Entis from Zenix was because he and Coco had this really good synergy where he would go mid and Coco would get ahead, and that's kind of how that team worked.
Okay, well, as much as I love history, this could actually go on for a while, so
skip forward. Basically, he used to be a mid-focused jungler, and now he either power farms or we saw him go shift a lot to the top lane. And I know Kelsey has a ton of stuff to say about
I think.
Well, before we get to V, I kind of just want to ask. We haven't seen Qiao play in a while. The last we saw them was when they failed to get the last seed, the last 2 seeds to go to Worlds. So it's been several months now. Did you notice anything even like remotely different about Swift's jungling? At I am clone, anything, not just pathing. Like, I don't want to say champion pool because he did play
No.
Kindred, but I mean Kindred seems like a champion that he'd play. So basically, he kind of came in. It's just like everything you expected. Nothing at all has changed.
I think, yeah, pretty much. Like, the one thing I'd say that if Qiao can look at Swift's performance and take away is that they do a lot better when he is aggressive early, when he actually is paying attention to lanes. And I think that's something that they really should look at as a takeaway from this and be like, hey, what happens if you pay attention to lanes and don't take all the kills? Like, that might be kind of a good idea going forward.
There'll be times where and it's usually on Greg's games, I think, where he kind of just sits back and farms. And it comes down to where his pressure will be based solely on counter ganking. So like if he'll just like basically just farm up, see if he can get to like level 6 or something, and ward. And his wards will just be to protect the lanes. And so if anything does come up, like if he does see any activity, he'll just camp out the area, like to see if he can get a decent counter gank. And if nothing happens, well, guess what? Hey man, more time to farm. Like that's his playstyle.
Yeah.
So it's like that's something going into oh god, it was clone, right? God, all these IEMs just blend together. Well, yeah, so going into clone we were also aware about. So it was just basically he's going to be aggressive if he has the proper 2v2, but otherwise he's going to just ward out and counter gank. So it was one of those situations where you have to be a little bit wary going in.
So I kind of wanted to go into what his strengths and weaknesses are, but I feel like that's at this point they've already been stated. Like, okay, yes, he's obviously very mechanically strong and he's very early game oriented. He's he likes to get those kills, but what is like a glaring weakness that you think he absolutely needs to fix if you had to pick one in order to really help this style that Qiao really like playing?
Stop taking kills. Stop trying to 1v1 the enemy jungler when you shouldn't. Or 1v1 anyone when you shouldn't.
Pretty much could come down to just like attitude, selfishness. It's a tough word to put out there because it's already really strong. I already regret saying selfishness, but basically that team has all the players, TNT, and V. Like TNT, V, Q, and B. Like V honestly doesn't get as much pressure as he should. And that's what it comes down to. Like V becomes a target, like you've seen, like when we played against him. He's a target, and he's not a target because he's a bad player. But like if you legitimately just give him pressure, like kills, or like even if you just gank him and take the kills, just give him the assists, fine. Just like I'm alright with that. But I think he needs a little bit more love. But that's just life apparently. I think he just needs to be a lot more active on the top side of the map is what it comes down to.
Speaking of V, so we could kind of like move from Swift to our next player. Mm-hmm. Do you think that if given more resources, V could actually step up to be a top laner? Kelsey?
So the thing about V that's really interesting is that people who only watch the LPL sort of think of V as this guy who only played Hecarim and only played Maokai, and he
played Lulu too.
Behind. He played Lulu, to be honest, like twice. Like straight up, he didn't really play Lulu that much. Like 50%, more than 50% of his games were Hecarim or Maokai. But this is something that people will think about him with as someone who doesn't really have a lot of pressure, or he just plays as one champion. And as Raz said, he was ignored a lot in LPL. But if you watch their LSPL games or how they used to play, V actually had the highest KDA and some of like the most kills of the team. Mm-hmm. And he got more attention and more jungle pressure, and he played a much wider pool of champions.
What I thought was really interesting is probably his best champion in LSPL was a champion that he didn't really play even until playoffs, which was Gnar.
Yeah.
And yeah, he had a ridiculous. He had like an over 12 KDAR Gnar after playing it like 8 games or whatever in the LSPL, and his Gnar flanks were just super good. And he also played like Kassadin. He played Lissandra. This was something that people brought up actually, was that they didn't think that he was a Lissandra player, but he has played Lissandra in the past. And of course, LSPL, the pool of top laners that you play against isn't that strong. So that is a good transition into the future.
Yeah.
Which is that style for them wasn't working as well in OPL, and Swift became a much more inconsistent jungler. I think the communication aspect between Swift and between Korean junglers, because we see this a lot in OPL, is there will be games where Dandy has great games. There will be games where Qiao has great games. There will be games where Spirit has great games. And I feel like those are the games that people watch and they're hyping up these Korean junglers like, oh my god, they're so good, right? Still, but then if you watch every single game they play, I'm just like, this guy's literally doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like, probably more than 50% of the time. And I think it's like, it's not going to be this player suddenly decides to do nothing. It's just, it's hard to convey like where the pressure should be, what the pathing should be for these Korean junglers until they learn Chinese. And so I think in IEM, it may have been that they were unused to playing in a competitive environment together, because I feel like their cohesion as a team is just something that got better throughout the weekend. And they did say we weren't really practiced going into this tournament. So having some practice, playing some competitive matches, ironed out the kinks, and they were playing much more to V's side of the map. Honestly, of the lanes that I would put more pressure on, I wouldn't do mid. I wouldn't do bot. Like, I think TNT is a great player, but I think that the way that lane works, and it's not just TCT, I blame TCT a lot, but they make too many laning mistakes that any lead you give them, they're just going to throw away. So you kind of have to let him, get flame horizon, like, quite honestly, because that guy, even with little farm, is still going to be useful. Whereas V, I think it needs to be more of a carry player, because he's not suited to tanks. Like, he's not like a super good tank player unless he has a lead. I don't think, as much as he played Maokai, I didn't like his Maokai. I've liked his Fiora, I've liked his Aurelia, I've liked his Gnar, I've liked his, whatever Kassadin stuff that he's played much better. And I think that he has a little bit of a Flandra syndrome. And if you watched Flandra in spring, you know what I mean, which is that he played pretty much exclusively Maokai, and he didn't look that great. And then this summer, suddenly, oh god, Flandra, people love Flandra, He was like that in LSPL too, where he just seems much better on carries. And I think B is like that too. But I think B is more intelligent and less like, he's not going to outplay you as much as Flandra. So this is where I would put V.
Okay, so this weekend we saw him add Rise and Fiora to his champion pool, both of which he had. I mean, to be fair, he played these champs more than any other champs during the tournament, and he added them to his champion pool. Both are, I guess, considered carry champions, obviously. So what do you think prompted this change? Since right at the moment, it's not like tank top laners are out of the meta, since we did see we see the Maokais and we see the Shens. So what do you think prompted them to add these champs to his pool? And do you think that this kind of like backs up your point that he's more successful to be allowed to play carry champions?
If I'm honest, I felt a little bit like QG to prepare for this tournament. They studied Worlds VODs, which is super awkward to say. But that's how they were playing. It's like if they had drafted like this at the regional qualifier, they probably would have gone to Worlds, like straight up.
Yeah, pretty much.
But yeah, so I just feel like they didn't really feel like they had a lot of recent competitive games or research to draw on, and they were playing, like, I mean, the meme is the Chinese teams are 3 patches behind, right?
Right.
They were literally playing, like, 3 patches behind. So it's funny because the patch has been out, and there have been a couple of Chinese tournaments where I feel like the drafting was better than this already on the preseason. So they could have studied like even NESO, though NESO had a lot of problems. They could have studied something like that and done better.
Well, as accidental as his success could have been at, I was looking at stats, and he had the sixth highest KDA of any player in the tournament, and of the top five, four of the players were one was like Noxiac, there was like two Cloud9 players. So there, if anything, his KDA holds more weight because they've played 11 like literally every single match like fully.
Yeah.
So they played 11 games. Fnatic played 3 games. Cloud9 played. They also, I guess, played 3 games since they went to a best of 3. There was one ever player, but I mean that's okay. So we can kind of say that he did his job as a carry player. So would you consider that as proof that he can be successful? I know you said like they were playing like like they were 3 patches behind, but still, what do you think?
You mean, do you think that he can be a successful carry player?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to use the. You don't have.
Just
go on.
I think one of their big problems is that they didn't really necessarily play towards the split pushing that they should have played towards. With the Fiora, I think his Fiora team fighting was pretty decent. Some of his decisions in lane were strange, and some of like the way he used his abilities was weird at times. But I think overall his Fiora was pretty good. And the issue was just getting him to stay in lanes. And this has been. I praised this in a way in my final article about QG Reapers, which is that I think that QG decided to continue playing towards their strengths rather than trying to radically alter their playstyle going into Extreme Masters when they realized that they were making these mistakes. But for LPL, they're going to have to adapt more and change their playstyle if they want to have some success. But they just were very fixated still on the team fighting when they had these split push picks where they could have covered more of the map. And I actually, weirdly enough, think that one of the best games, and I'm not just saying this because it's Raz, but I think one of the best games where they played, one of the best strategies to play against QG was actually done by Dignitas, because they were just good at keeping the lanes pushed out and going to different parts of the map where QG weren't. I feel like even Ever didn't do it as well. I think Ever kind of met QG on their turf and took advantage of the fact that QG were going to be over aggressive and just brought a lot of tools to turn fights and things like that. So I think that was a good strategy that Ever executed, but that won't always be as effective as exerting pressure on different parts of the map, because QG, I feel like they have, as weird as it is to say this about a mixed language team, since we said that their communication wasn't that great, I think that they kind of have to be together to be effective at times. It's like they have hive mind syndrome or something like that. It's like V doesn't want to be separated from the team. Like there were times where I watched him on the mini map and he would be split pushing, and it's like he'd start walking away from the lane and someone told him to go back or something, so he'd go back and split push, and it was like he didn't want to be a split pusher. He wanted to be involved in the fights. He wanted to be with the rest of the team. He wanted to feel included. It's almost like V as a player feels completely detached from the rest. It's weird because it's like you have these duos, right? You have Doinby and Swift, and then you have TCT and TNT, and V's kind of alone, just there. And he's actually expressed that he feels like he's trying to be a team player, but he is being ignored by his team a lot. He's actually coming out and expressed this. So it's weird to say that you can kind of see it in his playstyle. Yeah. And for me, going forward, something for QG to consider would be for Swift to play towards his solo lanes and not necessarily to play towards himself as much.
So okay, so from what you've seen of QG, this is like for everyone. From the tournament, is there anything that you saw that they definitely improved on since we last saw them?
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. In my opinion, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think so. I guess the most like even when I say that, like even if I was about to say perhaps drafting, but that's something that is ever like a problem for them because it's all relative really. It's like okay, well their drafting is better, but it's still not up to like the current patch. And in their own play, they still play to the same style. They're just the same team with less practice, I think. So I think with like more practice, maybe they can play to like maybe they can better like strengthen themselves and like maybe take away certain weaknesses. But that wasn't shown in this tournament.
Okay, so is the general consensus among you three that this is basically the same team that like we left them for a few months and then they came back and like they played a few slightly different champs, but essentially this was just the same team?
I think they did the one change, and it's only like a slight one, and it only happened in about like half the games. But they did play towards the top side of the map a bit more, and that could just be the Kelsey's point where they studied World's VODs, and then they were like, "Oh, we need to have carry top laners now." But I think that would be again something that they should look at going forward into the season. But other than that, I mean, we saw a lot of the same problems. Like they don't know how to execute split push. They have trouble in lane swaps. They have trouble in the early game, and then they come back. They're team fighting.
Okay, so I'm glad you actually said looking forward to the upcoming LPL switch, since that's sort of like the last topic that I wanted us to transition to, which is what our general impressions were from this tournament and how we can what we see going forward. So last split they kind of this sentiment has been expressed before where they don't make that much sense on paper. They shouldn't be doing as well as they are. This team was second for like the entirety of last split, their first split in the LPL, and then they just barely like didn't make it to Worlds. They lost out to IG, which can just one morning wakes up and is just completely special needs, and then like some days they wake up and they're just like, let's be one of the best teams in the world.
It's like hey guys.
So it's like, hey guys, so we're gonna win.
There's something special in my coffee today, guys. Hey.
Yeah, like Mafa was just like putting Adderall in their
IG
coffee.
are never good. It's all a lie. Let's be honest.
It's just an
IG
optical
are never
illusion.
good. It's
They're
a
they're
lie.
faking it like they faked the moon landing.
Oh god,
They
IG.
didn't actually beat QG in the regional qualifier. It's just that that's how it displayed on our screen because
It was smoke and mirrors.
that's what Wongsikong paid for us to see on our screen.
Oh my god.
Unfortunately, he was unable to bribe the tournament organizers in Paris in the same way. So unfortunately,
Oh,
he's acquiring resources to pay the next World's group stage tournament organizers off. Obviously.
I mean, you're saying all these things like you're not gonna go to China, and I personally don't want to see you beheaded. But you know what? That's your call. You're a grown girl.
You're grown.
Okay, so
Everyone knows I don't actually think that, because if I did actually think that, then maybe IG would actually win games consistently.
nice save.
There we go.
Okay, so going forward into LPL this next split, and I know it's kind of hard to say since we don't know the rosters fully. I mean, you sort of know like from what you heard, but anything could happen basically.
I
People.
think I know all but like 4 of them, so yeah.
Okay, so based on how they're playing now, do you see them being as successful in an upcoming split as they were before?
the teams I'm optimistic about in LPL have nothing to do with necessarily their current form or
Mhm.
how I think they can do based on their play style or whatever. It has more to do with whether or not I have faith in their infrastructure. And I think that QG, from my understanding, is that they are acquired by Newbie now, and
Oh.
they aren't changing the roster. They're able to retain the roster, but they're going to invest more in infrastructural things. I know that Linko is a little bit more savvy in terms of organization and trying to enforce things than other managers. And so, yeah, I think that QG will do well. I think EDG will still be the best team. I think QG and Snake can do okay, and the rest is just going to be more lies.
I'm just
and-
letting you know now. Every time that you say you have faith in Snake, Snake fails you. So I think you should just stop jinxing them.
This is the truth.
Yeah.
Like,
It
you
could
say,
also
like,
be
you-
me
you-
because I like Snake
I'm-
too.
If
Okay,
certain
I
things
ju-
happen with this, if certain things happen with the Snake roster, then no.
I'm just.
Also, if they don't get a pick band coach, then no. So probably no.
Probably.
I only care about EDG and QG
Yeah, because I'm
this
just
coming
saying,
year,
like,
yeah.
the pattern seems to be, I think Snake could be the best team at Worlds. Snake doesn't make it to Worlds. I think Snake can take this tournament. They don't take this tournament. Okay, they'll definitely take the next one. They don't do that. So let's just start picking teams that we don't like to do well. And since no one's luck here is like any good.
I don't necessarily like Snake, okay? I just think that they have like enough infrastructure to be semi-consistent and
Okay.
to improve.
Right.
I
okay,
want the teams with the good infrastructure to do well because I know the teams with the bad infrastructure won't. So it doesn't really matter if they have good players, okay? I just want the teams with the good infrastructure to do well because those are the ones that might be able to perform internationally instead of just goofing off all the time. Good job.
okay.
There we go.
Well, that's optimistic. Okay, so anyway, I don't want to say like I don't want to ask at this point what we want to see out of QG because I think that's already been stated. We want V to play these carry champions. We want more attention. We want Swift to give more attention to the solo lanes. Specifically, V Doinb can just continue being Doinb. God bless that free spirit. And for Swift to stop being, greedy with the
Idiot.
kill, yeah, and then just like jumping into like into team fight thinking he's Thor when in reality he's Black Widow. No, I'm sorry, Black Widow just. How do you like put like she knows like some kung fu and everyone else has like lasers, a hammer, some like the Hulk. It's Captain America. I don't actually know what Captain America does, but like that
He
shield.
has that
looks
shield.
Like
He just throws that
Yeah.
shield with quite the arm. That's just.
that's his thing.
It's America. He has that football throwing arm. He just gets that out there.
He has the power of America.
He's a quarterback, man.
Okay, so I kind of want to go back to something you said earlier, which is you want to see them change their play style a bit to be more. What was it you said? Closer to what the meta dictates. Is that something you said, Kelsey? I don't know. But basically, I'm saying, so what can they do to their play
I
style?
don't think they'll ever be a meta team.
Okay, so
ever. I just don't
Yeah.
think they
I agree with that.
necessarily
Which-
to the meta that the
Okay,
next season is transitioning into.
Okay, so what I do want to ask is, okay, so without like just assuming like, okay, so this is what they need to do, and then they'll be a perfect team. So at this point, we sort of like have an idea of these players, their personalities, their play style. So what would you think is like an acceptable goal for them that you can actually see happening that would make them a successful team going forward, without like being like unrealistic with your expectations?
I think that they can work on some early game stuff. I would say that I don't think QG necessarily improved from what we saw of them before going into the tournament, but over time it was clear that they had a certain amount of retention. in terms of things that were happening in the game. Like the first day, their attempts at lane swapping were just hilariously. I don't even understand what happened. But in the final, they actually seem to have a better understanding of like what wave do we push on at least.
Do you
when we have our duo top, things like that.
Do you think they were?
How do we not impale ourselves upon the tower?
Do you also think that they were playing?
Yeah,
to
so
the
I think
strengths of
it
their
was
opponent? Not to the strength. Do you think they're also a team that plays to the level of their opponent? Not to say like
I
that
never
Dignitas
really
is like a
that explanation.
No,
I never really buy that explanation because
Mhm.
I don't really understand how a team can do that. Maybe this is a lie. Maybe some teams are like suddenly they play against a really good opponent and they figure out what to do in the game magically. I don't know. Maybe some teams work like that, but I never really buy that explanation.
Oh.
I always figure
It was
if
just
a
a
team
thought.
looks like they're playing to the level of their opponent, it's more along the lines of they take certain risks. Like those types of teams, I feel like they're taking certain risks, and those risks will pay off differently depending on how good their teams are. But the risks that they're taking aren't necessarily changing, I guess.
I think there are teams that play
so for example,
I think there are teams that play to their opponents, and it's not so much that they're ever. I don't think there's ever a case where a team is playing upwards, like they're playing better than they usually do. I think it's always teams that, like, if they go up against a team that is much.
Okay, I can accept that. Yeah.
So it's just I see what you mean. So it just really that's I think that's my point though.
I mean, I'm also.
But I think the things that made them look better though wasn't necessarily that they played better in a more skill based sense. Or that they were more motivated. It seemed like the things that were helping them improve were actually based on like retention of information that they were learning in games.
A lot of
and also the fact that their communication and their synergy just seemed to it seemed like they were getting back into the swing of things and also learning about the game as it went.
I'm just basing this off not only off the tournament but sort of off their regular season last split, since they kind of went even against every single team aside from like a few. So I mean, that was also sort of like the thought I was getting, and I don't necessarily believe that's the kind of team they are. I'm just, it was just an interesting thought.
It's actually a big misconception spread by Monte Cristo, and I will get on this because I mean, people listen to him instead of me. But QG weren't necessarily more 1-1 oriented than other teams. I think people started noticing it because they were specifically losing on certain sides or losing like the first game and then winning the second game in a more habitual fashion. So that was weird. But I think the thing that they tied for 1-1. Like half of the teams had as many 1-1s as them in the LPL, and then of course LGD Gaming had more 1-1s than them. So it wasn't. I just think all of LPL is kind of like that, unfortunately.
Okay, so you think that?
So it's
So you think it's not so much that it's an outlier, but it's sort of like a statistic that is falsely like drawing your eye, but there's like no reasonable there's no reasonable conclusion as to why they did it. It's just sort of turned out that way because of certain side advantages and the fact that there's just a lot of games.
I also think
there are a lot of factors. I want Emily to talk.
One at a time.
LPL is very risk oriented. Sorry, I just think that I'm just gonna say really quickly. I just think again the LPL culture is much more risk oriented because players want to do outplays and not necessarily study the game as much. So you'll get a lot more 1-1s.
Okay, Emily.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I think one thing that you can say specifically about Qiao is that they're willing to try a lot of things.
Oh my God, Emily, careful with that. The last time you said they're very willing to try a lot of things.
Alright, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to use this tournament as an example. Okay. What I'm trying to say is that Qiao, they are willing to learn.
Okay.
It sometimes takes them a while, yes. But I think you saw them gradually. The reason why, like, people are saying that they're playing to the level of their opponents or whatever. I don't actually think that. I think it's just that over the tournament, they looked at what other teams were doing and they were like, oh, okay, this might be a good thing to do instead of what we're doing right now. And they were able to take some of that and take it into the final. That's all I was gonna say.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, the last time you said that they, that they used it as a learning or experiment, like, a certain Korean caster literally, like, jumped up your ass and, like, just did one of these.
Well,
but we won't name names.
Well, my point on that is I think that with Qiao specifically, oh God, now I'm already forgetting it. I think that learning is something that is not gonna. I don't want to say that they're not going to learn. I think that I guess it depends what they're learning, right? Because I think that they're gonna stick to their style as long as they have this roster. As long as this roster stays together, this style will never die. And yeah.
Do you see any reason for them? Like, because most teams I don't know. Is that fair to say most teams are having at least some kind of roster change? So I think they're among the few that the roster's staying the same. Do you think there's any reason for them to change the roster at all?
I guess not. I feel like they should. They should see the reason. I think the biggest reason it just comes down to that Swift is shaping their team, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like I think it's probably a good thing because they can keep like the synergy between him and Doinb is actually really solid, and that if you like Doinb playing around a jungler is really good. I think that like it allows him to do so much more. You can see him like it's one example is just literally him playing any champion he wants, and he can do that because like when I say any champion he wants, not to really like compliment himself, like he's like, oh, I'm just gonna play an assassin and my team's gonna play around me. No, he's gonna play the best for the team and for Swift, and they can just kind of like play off of each other, and I think that's really nice. And if you change that aspect, maybe, and I don't think it'll be really hard to find it being a better change. I don't know if that's not the English language.
I mean, to me,
I said this on
one
previous
player.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just want to like I know you're gonna get into your rant, but I just wanted to say I think the one player they could probably change without it affecting the team chemistry too much in game is TCT, but outside of game there's an obvious there's a reason TNT wanted him there, and so there's a lot to be said about that kind of environment setting. Yeah. So it's like you can look at it cosmetically and say we should replace TCT, but we don't really know the out-of-game impact also.
Because the reason I ask is we talked about this before, how they are possibly a team that might have already hit their ceiling, and they sort of have like the problem that Cloud9 had, where it's like you don't really know who to replace without like it harming the team first more than the team before they get better. Yeah. So it's kind of one of those dilemmas, I think. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was going to say. Like, I said that before this tournament, but it's such an oddly, like, delicately balanced team that replacing a part is going to... Like, no other team can play like this, but it works for what they do. And there is an obvious skill ceiling. I don't think they've hit it because they don't know how to draft properly. But... I think that if you try to like mess with their balance right now, it's not gonna work. The whole team is just gonna fall apart.
Go on.
I also think that this is the kind of team where even if they do hit their ceiling, they have a lot of room for sideways growing, if that makes sense. Because they have been able to change their playstyle in the past, and they have been able to find ways to work around the meta also in the past, and to not necessarily improve, but play differently. So I think that they're never going to be a team that's good at laning necessarily, but they can find new ways, and they have found new ways to compensate for that.
Okay. I think that's pretty much all I really want to discuss. But does anyone here have any final thoughts on QG, or what they how they feel they're going to perform in the next split. I feel like that's like the hardest thing to say. So, but anything at all?
I think they'll perform well. I think they're the most consistent team right now, and they'll well going in there they're going to be. So they're gonna have that
More
consistent.
consistent than EDG.
No, but I guess they're gonna be
Okay, but
they're gonna be a solid second or third place, and I think that's just gonna stick until perhaps World Elite or another team comes up, and we'll see how that works out. I guess, or Vichy even.
Okay.
Who
Anyone?
knows?
God, she's putting hype on W.
I know. I was like, wait, where's
Oh, God.
World Elite?
Oh God, everyone runs the cover.
It's happening.
Those organizations are dumpster fires.
Raz,
Raz.
you were
Oh.
the person that said IG was gonna do well. So
Does anyone else have any closing thoughts on QG?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I think the one thing I want to say is that something I'm not saying is that QG performed necessarily so much better than the other Chinese teams internationally. I think they got into a situation where they faced the first week, the first day they faced a team that necessarily wasn't going to be that tough of an opponent. Sorry, Raz.
That's right.
But that team, Dignitas, first of all, new roster. They were playing with different support, and QG kind of had an ability to ease into the tournament, whereas I feel like most of the other teams at Worlds just hit a brick wall instantly, where they realized our style isn't going to work. What are we going to do? Whereas QG kind of were able to have a little bit of a mental breather before they got into some of the hard stuff. LGD mentally at San Jose, I think, was just a mess still anyway. So that's
I'm
But I do think the thing though to say is that QG showed an ability to learn, and they stuck to their style, which was a big difference between them and Edward Gaming at Worlds.
Okay.
So I think that they're not going to necessarily, like, Pyra said something at the end where he's like, oh, this team, they did so well and the other Chinese teams didn't, and this isn't smashing on Pyra or anything, and the other teams internationally haven't done well at all. Like, this team could win the LPL. I don't think that that's what we're seeing, and I don't think that QG necessarily redeemed China at a tournament like this, because it was honestly a tournament that anyone could have come out and performed well and won. So
I think this, and I believe we briefly mentioned this last episode, of the teams in IM Cologne. They were like one of two that came in with the same roster, the other being Ever. Everyone else pretty much came in with a relatively fresh roster. So, I mean, and to that point, they still, they couldn't 2-0 any of the teams, and I don't think they looked 100% confident in any of the series that they played. So, I mean, I think that's worth saying to back up your own point. That again, they made it that what we mentioned earlier, where one of the reasons we could say that they made it as far as they did wasn't so much on their own play, but on everyone else's play. We don't know how long. I mean, again, Raz's team had a sub, and I have no idea how long this Fnatic roster has been playing together, but it's not been long, and it's definitely not been as long as QG.
3 days.
So, I mean, yes, again,
3 days before the tournament.
So yeah, so that's, I mean, not that QG has been practicing, but at the very least, their communication should be like second best, because again, I guess we can say that Ever has better communication because they don't have a hybrid team, but I don't know how much weight that holds compared to a team that already has been playing for half a year, no, more than half a year, for a while now, and managed to be second during LPL summer, right?
I will say this. I think the reason why, well, I guess more of a defense. I think the reason why Dig did so well against Qiao Gusher, it was a bit of easing in, but at the same time, I think we, like, stylistically, I thought we matched up really well against Qiao Gu. I thought going into it, I was like, okay, we're an extremely, from just like the practice that we've gone through, and just like the attitude that we've had as a team, I thought it's like, okay, we're a really aggressive team, like right from the early game going forward. And so I thought that was like a major thing that honestly I didn't think Xiaogu would be able to have an answer for up until late game, and then they had an answer. so that was a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that's like everything. I think that's everything that's left to
I will
say
say,
about.
Yeah.
the next day, Linko, the QG's manager, messaged me and he said, "Dig jungler, really good."
Oh my god.
Yeah, good job. so there you go. Kire props.
Oh, there you
from,
go.
Linko,
All right,
QG's
so-
God
manager.
bless.
I think that's everything left to say. No, we're good.
Yep, we're good.
Okay, so let's do some plugs. Emily.
I just wrote an article on Swift, first place.
Okay, let's link. We'll link that in the description below. Are you anything you're writing of note?
I'm not sure what I'm going to write about this week, but it should be fun. So look forward to it.
There you go.
Okay. What about you, Emily?
Kelsey, you mean?
I mean Kelsey. Yeah.
Kelsey.
Sorry, I was looking at a text message.
So I would say I just put out this week's Rebuilding China. I put out a different article every day of Intel Extreme Masters Cologne. I was going to do an article on the European teams, but pretty much my summary is going to be I played about how I thought they were going to play. So I decided not to do one of those. And instead, I'm going to focus on two more intensive projects that are probably going to be multiple parts to be released before the new seasons start. So those probably won't be out next week, but a few weeks or something.
Okay, I'm excited.
There you go.
That's awesome.
So, okay, I think that's everything. Next week we're going to talk about rosters, roster news, and the qualifier coming up. Because what was all the news that was also released that we couldn't really talk about this episode was the format changes to LPL. So we're all really excited to talk about that.
Woo, group draw.
All right, so I think that's it. Everybody, wave it off.
IF! Woo!
Woo! Bye-bye. Yay! Okay, so this is gonna be a somewhat shorter episode since mostly I just want to talk about QG's performance at IM and what everyone here took away from it, and we're gonna see if we could possibly try to make use their performance as a precursor for the upcoming LPL split, which starts January. What was it? 14.
14.
I think so.
14. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm just going to refer to this episode as National Lampoon QG Go to IM Club. Because I'm whimsical like that. So I kind of want to just jump in with Raz talking about his team's discussion against QG in the quarterfinals, since he kind of got a first-hand perspective. So what exactly did they do that you absolutely expected, and what did they what did they kind of do that threw you off guard? And I don't know what you think contributed to your team's loss against them, but let's just say for all intents and purposes that they just did something to surprise you guys. Go on.
The Doinby and Swift play really closely to each other in a sense. They just play off of each other's pressure. And so while bot lane, TNT and TCT just kind of are left to their own devices, I feel like majority of the early game, not even just the early game, but just Xiaogu just plays like it's Doinby and Swift playing off of each other. And it used to be the bot lane as well, when they used to play like just basically wave clear champions like Sivir. So they can really just rotate off of their off their pushes, or they can facilitate like Swift's invades, or if he wants to pressure something in general. But yeah, so that was the main pressure point, and the big one of course is that V is put to his own devices in a sense. So I don't want to call him. I feel like a poor term is like calling him Dyrus, but because he's not at all. but just he's left to his own, and if he gets it ganked, that's well and all that works for him, and he can use it. But the game, early game.
Hello, children, adults, seniors. It's a new day, and Star Wars paraphernalia is still running rampant in every store across the globe, so we're clearly drawing closer to the end of days.
Yep.
So how's everyone?
Pretty good.
Pretty, yeah. Yep, I'm embracing the end of days, really.
I'm glad. I mean, I like starting off with like a nice positive like atmosphere, so good. So joining me today, as always, is this lovely panel. We have the score writer and oil tycoon Kelsey Moser. We have LOL Esports and Splice writer, as well as lifestyle guru Emily Rand.
Hi.
And then we have Dignitas head analyst Raz. I'm not really sure how long that title is going to last after it got knocked out of the first round of I Am Clone, but you know, I'm praying for you, friend. So there's that. And then there's me. I'm Andy, host and professional lingerie model, and this is episode 63 of China Talk.
Yay. So going into Qiao, we knew of their style really well. Essentially, that I think the biggest one, of course, the biggest red flag is it? I guess red flag is the proper term. Is Swift. Swift and Doinby, essentially. I think Swift is a jungler that you can pretty much easily telegraph is that he's just going to play Nidalee. Nidalee, maybe at least in, I don't know, but like I feel like Nidalee is just a champion that he just like clings on to, and if he gets the opportunity to play it, or if he sees that it's something he's looking towards, then he'll pick it. And Doinby is usually put on, and I guess it's his choice, but like he likes to wave clear mid lane champions. And the caveat is, God, is the thing about him playing wave clear champions is that he also knows the counters to him as well. And of course, everybody knows the counters, but he's extremely willing to play the counters into it, and that extends to like LeBlanc or Kassadin, etc. So with those two, and of course with just getting past the point of the champions, mid game. They don't play towards him. So yeah, that was the knowledge going into it, or at least just the gist of it.
Okay, so again, what about them do you think led to your own team losing?
Oh god, I don't even think it was about that. I think it was mostly just about us. I think that.
Okay. Because I mean, not to interrupt you, but a question that I left after I left with after watching the tournament was sort of about you know, how much of QG making the finals of I Am Cologne was them, and how much of it was, you know, the under preparation of their opponents, because you know, you guys are a relatively new team. You guys played with the sub, and then I don't know how long the Fnatic roster has been playing together, but they're also new.
Yeah.
So you know, all the games went to 3 games, and then the finals went to 5 games. So it really made me question how, like, again, a topic we're going to touch on earlier is how much, you know, if they actually